Next up, we have yet another Alabama offensive player, yet another Alabama offensive wide receiver, right? Off the back of having just done Devonta Smith, now we have Jaylen Waddle, right? His running mate and sort of partner in crime in that regard. And a guy who, ironically, you wouldn't think that there's many people that have another wide receiver ahead of the Heisman winner, let alone another receiver on the same team ahead of the Heisman winner. But a lot of people think that Waddle is straight up just better than Devonta Smith, which I find a little bit interesting. Obviously, if you've watched my Smith video, you'll know I'm pretty high on him. But, Waddle's had a pretty different path to this point than Smith had, despite them being teammates, right? With Smith, what you saw was he came in and, that first year wasn't very good. Then the next year he gets better. And, that last season, Heisman caliber 1,800 yards, right? With Waddle, it was kind of the opposite way, where he comes in, steps in as a true freshman, nonetheless, 15 games, 850 yards, 7 touchdowns. That's phenomenal, right? The only thing for me then is I'd be looking for him to build on that in some capacity. And he really never did that, right? The next year, 13 games, but he had pretty significantly less receptions as well as yards, even just on a per game basis. So some question marks there, right? Obviously, we know the other receivers in that wide receiver core, so it's understandable. But at the same time, we're looking for that constant improvement, right? And it just didn't really seem like that was there. He did in those 6 games that he played in 2020, however, look very good, right? And then obviously he broke his ankle, I believe, back in October, comes back for the game against Ohio State, but otherwise did miss a pretty significant chunk of the season. So a lot of people have kind of theorized that if he didn't end up getting hurt, he would have been the Heisman winner, which is interesting, right? Because a lot of people don't like that Heisman winner because he's too small and going to get hurt. But the guy who did get hurt, nonetheless, I think you guys understand my point. But I did actually have one other thing I wanted to bring up that I don't know the answer to. Hopefully somebody else does here that's watching this and can enlighten myself and everybody else in the comment section down below. So Waddle was born in the same year that I was, 1998. I was born in March. He was born in November. Well, I know obviously when you're born later in the year, occasionally parents will hold you out of going to school for that first year, right? I understand that. Well, for me, by example, after I graduated high school, went to college, redshirted my first year, and then, had I ended up playing my full subsequent 4 years, if my senior season wasn't canceled, this is my 5th year of college right now that I'd technically be in, right? So how is Waddle graduating after only being at Alabama for 3, yet same age? A little bit confused there. Like, was there a gap year there? Was he held back in addition to what I would assume was the first time, right, being a little bit of a later birth? Just kind of questionable. And I noticed it a few videos back with Pat Freiermuth, and I noticed it again with Waddle. And I wish I would have paid a little bit more attention with some of the previous prospects, because that does make that, true freshman production a little bit less impressive, at least for me, when you're doing it as 19 or 20-year-old compared to as an 18-year-old, right? But I mean, production's production nonetheless. It's just interesting that he was only at college for 3 years and we're graduating in the same year, and I was there for 4.5, 5, right? That's the only question that I have. I'm not saying it's good or bad either way, right? I've just never really noticed that before with prospects, because, I was looking up Waddle and thinking, okay, he's 3 years. Is this man even 21 yet? And then I see, oh, he's turning 23 later this year. That just had me a little bit confused in that regard. But in terms of the grade, then, what you're going to see here then right away is that I'm a pretty big fan of Waddle as well. I think that generally solid in pretty much every category, right? With a lot of these top guys, it's kind of nitpicking strengths and weaknesses, because, the weaknesses aren't weak by any means, right? It's just who's stronger at what. And, in a lot of these different categories, what I found interesting is that you'd have, say, contested catches, right? You have Jamar as the high-end guy, Devonta, that's not really his thing, and then Waddle's kind of in the middle, whereas route running, by example, as you'll see, you have Smith, to me, is the far and away best guy. Then you have Jamar as he's pretty crisp, but doesn't have much nuance, and then Waddle's right in the middle, right? So I think that for the most part, when these grades are overall so tightly contested, it might be just a preference thing, right, in terms of which one you actually go. But as we get into the grades, route running, like I said, he just did a great job of pushing those routes vertical for as long as possible to put a lot of pressure on you to have to turn your hips and go before he would flip his hips back and, there's a comeback route, or turn in and there's an in route, right? Come back. That's a curl route, right? I feel like he did a very good job there of really maximizing his sort of speed and quickness to the fullest, because everything sort of looks like the streak, right? And, from there, yeah, sure, he could have added maybe a little bit more nuance when facing zone coverage, and you do have somebody designed just to defend the streak. But especially against man, I feel like he did a very good job of attacking those blind spots and working those sort of things. And that's why I gave him a 17.75. I think there is room to grow, but very, very solid. And I would say right sort of smack dab in between Smith and Chase. Speed and quickness, as I said, I think he's probably a sub 4.3 guy, but he's also incredibly quick as well, right? A lot of times you'll see people who test very fast, and then sometimes it's just straight line speed, right? I know that's something people were worried about with DK Metcalf, or, a concern that I'll maybe talk about in a few videos with, say, a Terrence Marshall Jr., right? That's not a concern with Waddle. I'd say he has the best combination of speed and quickness of any of the receivers that I've watched at this point, and I'll give him a 15. In terms of hands, I did think that he wasn't quite as consistent on hauling in those sort of catchable passes as Smith was. I felt like he was just a little bit worse than Chase as well. But he wasn't bad by any means. I know occasionally you'd see him use his body a little bit more than I'd like. You'd see him occasionally have a little bit of a concentration drop, but for the most part, very impressive. And that persisted into the 50-50 contested catch situations, which I'll be honest, kind of surprised me because for a 5'10 guy to be able to do what he did, very impressive, right? Just climbing the ladder, going up, and even against some 6'1" tall corners, just out jumping them essentially, right? And I'd love to know what his vertical is, right? 40, 41, 42, not entirely sure, but I know it's explosive because he certainly showed it off. But not only that, he showed off an ability to finish those plays as well, right? It's one thing to jump up there and get high up, but it's another to actually haul in that ball. And he did a very good job of that, at least in my opinion. And I think in a large part, you could credit some of that even to his tracking, right? Did a great job of once he located the ball, just seeing it in, right? And not having to constantly keep glancing up and slowing down, right? That's one thing that you'll see quite a bit on these deep ball receivers is that, yeah, they're fast, but then half the time they're slowing down, trying to figure out which shoulder they need to be looking over. Well, he's very good in just locating and boom, catching, right? It was a very simple process. He made significantly more difficult grabs look way easier than they should have just based off that ability alone, right? And in terms of body control, probably didn't have as many of the sort of sideline toe tap scenario type catches that a guy like Devonta Smith did, but still when he did was very impressive, right? And then otherwise, when he was sort of within the hashes, within the numbers, and asked to make plays on the ground after the catch, I don't know how much better it gets than him, right? So I gave him a 9.5 because not only does he have the speed, but he has the agility and elusiveness as well. And that's sort of what I was talking about with that quickness, right? You'll see guys who are sometimes really fast, but also a little bit stiff. Man, he cuts very fast, and it's going to be tough to find somebody who can make plays after the catch better than he does. And he does it so smooth too. That's one thing. You'll see guys who are trying to bust out these sort of ball carrier moves, and it just doesn't look right with him. It's so fluid, and in that way, 9.5 out of 10. I think it'll be tough to find a lot of guys much better than him in that regard. In terms of release, I thought, again, he was pretty solid. Would do a good job of altering his speeds a little bit on his release, just right off the snap to where, again, keep that defender guessing. And then a couple steps in, now I'm selling that flat vertical stem, right? And like I said, he did a great job of that. But getting into that, I felt like he did a good job varying things up at the line of scrimmage as well to, try and evade some of those press coverage situations. I feel like he did a solid job in that regard. It'll be interesting to see at the NFL level how he does, because again, being 5'10", will he be relegated to more of a slot receiver role than he sometimes was at Alabama? Either way, I think he's pretty well equipped to handle whatever you ask of him. Well, maybe besides blocking, that is, right? I probably shouldn't have had that as the segue there. But again, just didn't really offer much in terms of a willingness to block. And especially when you look on the other side of the field and you see Smith, who weighs less, who's probably less strong, and a little bit less fast, right? To see him throwing blocks and at least trying to throw blocks, and then see Waddle sort of lackadaisically taking bad angles, sort of similar to what I was saying with Chase, just a little bit disheartening in my mind. I gave him a 2. I also gave him a 2.5 for size, because as good as he plays at his size, again, I don't think 5'10", 185 is something to write home about, but the athleticism is. So 5 out of 5 there. Came out to an 82 overall, which when you put that on the big board, as you'll see, man, he's tightly packed in there right there with the other two guys, but I do have him as my wide receiver 3 to this point. I know obviously some other players in contention. Could a Rashad Bateman hop up there potentially? Not entirely sure. We'll have to wait and see there, but I think that Waddle is just ever so slightly below those other two guys. And for me, more of a top 15 pick, I would say, than a top 10 pick, I guess, if that makes sense. I think you could take Smith top 10, you could take Jamar top 10, and I'd feel good. Waddle, I'd say once I add in the QBs, maybe a cornerback or two here and there, once I get to them, I would say he's probably more of a top 15 guy, maybe in that 12 to 15 range. At that point, I'd feel very solid because, even though there are some question marks, right, with how things will translate, I think he showed great traits and, maybe some concerns about the ankle injury, right? That's for the medical staff to determine. If they think he's back and fully healthy, we're good to go. If they don't, if they think there's some question marks there, maybe you dock the grade a little bit more and, he goes a little bit lower, but still really solid, right? And they're almost so tightly packed that it becomes a question of preference, right? If you're a team like, say, the Giants or the Bears, right? You have a Kenny Galladay, you have an Allen Robinson, you have that sort of big jump ball contested catch receiver. Maybe you want to get somebody who has a different skill set, right, on the opposite side, and you'll go for a Smith or Waddle. Whereas if you're, say, Baltimore, right, who has a guy like Marquise Brown as your wide receiver one, maybe you'd look to add, say, a guy with Chase's skill set, right? But just by example, obviously, I know those teams aren't necessarily in the running to take these guys at the top of the draft, but I think that might be the sort of theory behind it, right? You're always trying to make your wide receiver core, at least from my point of view, look like a basketball team, right? You want to have guys who excel at, a little bit of everything here and there. You want a big guy who can win those 50-50 catches. You want a smaller guy who can maybe make something out of nothing. You want, a varying set of skills. So I think that might end up ultimately being what determines who goes where at the top of the draft. I don't really think that, a lot of people say, oh, Chase is flat the best guy. Bateman is flat the best guy, or Waddle is flat out, far and away, number one, the best guy. Devonta, nah, he's just too small. Well, no matter who you say is number one, I think it's a little bit facetious to act as though the gap to number two or even number three is massively big, right? I'd say there's some slight concerns with each of them, but I think that they're all sort of very tightly packed there, and I really wouldn't mind any of them, like I said, in sort of that top 10 probably for Smith and Chase, and then I would say top 15 for Waddle. But that's just a guess, right? I could finish the board and maybe no QBs are in the top 10, and Waddle remains where he is. Obviously, with that being said, we'll just have to wait and see. And I shouldn't even jump the gun to QBs because we have more wide receivers left, right? Maybe Rashad Bateman will come in and be the flat out best number one wide receiver in this draft. Maybe he'll surpass Jaylen Waddle as that sort of third best guy in my eyes, or maybe we'll have a lot of people filling in that space underneath in that sort of late first, second, third round range at that wide receiver position. And if you guys want to see those subsequent grades, make sure you guys subscribe, right? Obviously, make sure you're getting those videos in your sub boxes. Make sure you're liking and commenting on the videos, though, so that way people who aren't subscribed get those videos and see them as well, so that way the channel can keep growing. I know we're at 91 subs right now, hopefully 92, maybe 93 when you're watching this, but if you've made it this far, you could be number 94 maybe, right? Obviously, the road to 100 has been going pretty well lately in the lead up to this draft. I hope you guys are enjoying these videos and will continue to enjoy them as we continue to get closer and closer. So with that being said, that's really all I have for you guys today. I'm mic'd up, and I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys.